You're on Global TV Talk Show. I'm Ed, and in San Diego, and with us in York, Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Lancaster. I've been there once, as I've mentioned before, and I've got family next door in York.
You're welcome back anytime.
Yeah, thank you. Rob Pianka, Global Agility, is brilliant. I don't say that to butter up to you. It's just you have written a book, or you're in the process of finalizing it, and it's a tour de force from what you've sent me in prep for the radio shows and TV shows that we're doing here in this series about globalization and what does it matter. And it's changing, or isn't it changing? And what's the deal here? Let's welcome Rob Pianka.
Thank you, Ed. It's your compliments give me some confidence. I appreciate that.
So why does globalization matter? Well, it seems like it's a big deal. I mean, my business, globalbusinessnews.net, globaltvtalkshow.com, globalradiotalkshow.com, Global Press Club. So I certainly understand global. It's not going away. It's certainly going to change somewhat. What's your take?
Well, if you say, if you ask, why does globalization matter to all American businesses? Just a few exceptions, right? And my answer is, you might as well ask, why does the business environment matter to a business? I mean, globalization is pervasive. I have an example that I wanted to share. I'm going to name some companies, and we have to guess or identify which one is actually an American company. 7-Eleven, Ben & Jerry's, Budweiser, Burger King, Hellman's, Le Tigre Clothing, and Trader Joe's. Now, not to be coy about it, Le Tigre Clothing is the only American company on that list.
Yeah, Trader Joe's is owned by a Dutch company, right?
Yeah, it goes out and up.
Yeah,
to transnational land.
7-Eleven is Japanese, has been for many years, right?
Mm-hmm.
I don't know about Burger King, but some of the other companies you mentioned,
Yeah. Only Le Tigre is an American company. It's
I never even heard of it.
They make shirts, right?
Okay.
They picked a name. You know, tigers from the jungle, Le Tigre from France. So you've got, I don't know. They must have a whole lot of reasons for it, but it's the only American company.
Yeah.
So globalization is pervasive in our local lives, in our personal lives, in our businesses, in our business environment. So it matters because our business environment matters for our businesses, period.
And globalization means the flow of goods and ideas and people and minerals across borders in a trade situation.
On top of that, it's erased borders in many ways that we continue to think that borders exist. Right.
So when we talk about cultures, cross borders, across time and space, we're talking about something under the umbrella of globalization, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so it's not going away, but it's certainly going to, because it's dynamic and it's certainly people oriented other than laws and customs. But even that's border. But I don't know. I'm getting lost in my own thoughts.
Let's define the term. What do we mean by globalization? And I break it into four pieces. There's globalization itself, which consists of technological drivers and economic model drivers that you cannot put in back in the box. They're fact. They started with steam engines, and now it's the internet. Everything in between. You can't get rid of it. These are facts, and the technology moves. The business models that are enabled by the technologies advance. You can't do anything about it, right? There's a global system, which is, a system of international relationships and trade relationships which it's pretty good, but it's way behind. It's behind the curve, right? It's just like do or do they not tax internet sales? These types of things written large globally. Hasn't really caught up. Then there's globalism and anti-globalism, which are our opinions about these facts and all the disruption that occurs. It's that creative disruption about globalization that draws our attention. It breaks a lot of things, but makes a lot of things. And it's more change than most people bargain for. And it's more change than most people bargain for in a lifetime. And now you live 3 times longer than you used to. So we have to deal with a lot of change. There are a lot of people who like globalization. There are a lot of people who are against it. That's just opinion. It doesn't change the facts. And it doesn't make the international system any better, right? The fourth component is global agility, which is what you as an individual can do about all this. And it's the only thing you can do anything about. But in the end, we always talk about the big picture, right? So I thought, why don't we talk about a question you asked last time, which is the U.S.-China question. And I'll try to answer it in a way that you could see that I'm coming from a globally agile point of view to answer this issue.
So the culture differences between the U.S. and China, they're just huge. I mean, it's just totally not even opposite. It's just on a different plane.
Yeah. Oddly enough, though, global agility or intercultural things are not necessarily international. We tend to think of it that way. So you go to a website and they'll tell you, okay, here's Japanese culture because you're going to go to Japan as a business person, right? There is more cultural difference inside any one given country than there is between them. Cultural differences are all over the place. If you look, 2,000 yards around you right now, right, you're going to find a tremendous amount of cultural difference. A lot of it at this point is going to have come here across a border to stay. And a lot of those people are stakeholders in our lives who have a great deal of power. Might be a Swiss company buys an American company, boom, it's now a part of an international conglomerate, but it's got a Swiss CEO because they sent him here. That guy's a stakeholder, very powerful. And if you had a career track, you better be able to accommodate the fact that your boss is Swiss, right? Now, what I tell people is that you're not going to be able to guess what country to study. Right, it's so mixed up right now that you have to come up with a skill set that allows you to work well with anybody, no matter who pops up in front of you. So global agility is more block and tackle than it is education about another person's culture. It's more about you and your awareness and your self-awareness, your awareness about cultural dimensions, your self-awareness about how you've been trained to be, and then taking ownership of that as an adult and saying, okay, it's fine and well, and I'm proud of the things I'm proud of, but not wrong, but not necessarily adequate for the circumstance that I'm in, this globalized circumstance that I'm in. I need to be able to swim in deeper waters, and meet more different people, and have successful relationships with them. So how do you do that? Global agility is a training for that.
So, not to confuse the issues here, but just to step back a little bit from what you were just talking about. Mm-hmm. I live in downtown San Diego in Seaport Village, which means it's right on the water here. So if I get up high enough, not in this building where my condo is, but in another building down the street, which is 50 stories high, I can see Tijuana, Mexico, which is 9 miles down the freeway. Mm-hmm. So talk about proximity, and cross-border stuff. I'm living it. I see it. Mm-hmm. Joanne and I go down to Imperial Beach. Locals here call it IB. And on the IB pier, it's the southwesternmost southern most southwestern point in the U.S. where you can get a beer and shrimp and quesadilla right on the end of the pier, 1,000 feet into the water. And you look back at the border and the sand and the beach and the condos and restaurants at IB, and then scan to the right and you have some $1 million houses stretching down, and then it stops quarter of a mile down the street to the right, and then you have this international bird sanctuary between the border, between IB and Tijuana. Every year, like clockwork, birds fly up or fly out or wherever, from wherever, and they're in that marshland area. And then you go a mile inland to I-5 or 805 north-south, and I mean less than 8 minutes, you're at the international border of Tijuana.
Mhm.
And the products, many products are made south of the border and shipped back into US and Canada because of the NAFTA, or whatever it's called now, new NAFTA. And it's one huge economy, but there are old-fashioned borders
Mhm.
and laws. Let's talk about China. Let's go back there. Deng Xiaoping was critical, right? That's what, 25 years ago, something like that, maybe more.
Yeah. In the
Nixon.
well, I'd like to start a little bit at the beginning here.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
In the 1700s, the United States was born by a revolution against the colonial power.
Right.
Small country, easy to push around, like the War of 1812, that type of stuff for a long time, but isolated, right? When it did come into the world, for the most part, right, it was anti-colonial in its posture. I remember a U.S. general said recently, in the last couple of years, that the only territory America has overseas is the one where we buried our soldiers. Now, it's a strong statement. It's relatively true compared to other countries. Now, you can argue with me because there are examples, right? But vis-a-vis China, even back in the clipper ship days, when we would float around the world ducking all the colonial navies to have trade relations with all the countries in the world, it was never our intention, and we never really acted like, let's take this place. Let's be a stakeholder. That's a colonial term, stakeholder. Put a stake in the ground and say it's yours. Never really did that, right? There's a moment after World War II where the leaders of the greatest generation did not commit the mistakes that were made in the Versailles Treaty, right? So they created a world trade system and incorporated former enemies in the prosperity that we've enjoyed since then, right? Pretty interesting thing to do. Set up a win-win circumstance for other countries to join, to use free trade to increase the economies of everybody involved.
And look forward to a different new world without another world war.
Yeah, we set this up, right? Now, there's another moment when Deng Xiaoping, he ratchets this forward again. By abandoning, he's the communist leader of China, he abandons communist economics with the phrase that you might remember, I don't care if it's a white cat or a black cat, as long as it catches mice, right? Now, the Chinese from that point on, right, were able to square this circle of having an authoritarian communist party-based government and a freer, more prosperous economy, something that the Russians failed to do. And there's lots of reasons why the Chinese were able to do this, and maybe the Russians weren't. But over the next couple of decades after that, now, just by the way, I was working for a defense export firm at that time, and I was a business risk and opportunity analyst. So I was reading the congressional report about Deng's policies and how they shifted, and I followed it ever since, right? And it's a great historical achievement in so many ways, and for so many of the parties involved. And so over the next years, as the Chinese economy evolved, the U.S. and Chinese economies basically grew together, right? Whatever was below our value-added chain went to China. Now, a lot of people could get angry about the actual things that went and stayed, but let's just stay theoretical for a moment. Hand-making bristle shoe brushes did not stay in America. It went to China. Subsequently, it's gone to Vietnam. It's gone its way to Laos, right? But it's just not worth our while. It's no longer worth the Chinese while. But that's how that kind of thing works. And the economies grew together where, a lot of low-cost production created low-cost consumer goods here, right? So we had benefits of it. The Chinese were able to pull more than 1 billion people out of poverty, right? The success of post-colonial China in the structure that we built for win-win prosperity is something we should be really proud of, right? Oddly enough, right, the stress and disruption of this process was supposed to lead to a soft landing, on the level of policy, right? People were expecting to be able to soft land this thing, right? An export-driven Chinese economy earns enough for them to have a middle class and to get prosperous and to have a domestic market that they could turn to. It would take the pressure off of us. In the meantime, we're going to be shifting a lot of jobs, right, from industrial social class and agricultural social classes to them, causing a lot of disruption. But, low cost inputs, boom, greater prosperity. It's, if you're not talking about individuals, it kind of works out, right? But there was a lot of change in both countries, right? While we were waiting for the soft landing, and it's since the 1970s, the average income of the average American has stagnated, right? This puts in question the American dream. And without the American dream, I'm sorry, there's, it's trouble.
So
right?
let's just back up for a second,
Right.
and because we don't have a lot of time on this, certainly the next edition will go deeper in this. But the hollowing out of the American blue collar middle class is the result of making or allowing China to be our back end, our manufacturing center, rather than keeping everyday manufacturing in the US. And so a lot of towns across America suffered, and they're still suffering. The old downtowns in smaller towns, smaller cities, almost by design, were short-circuited. They didn't partake in the cash flow growth in America from modernization and tech, and well, frankly, people are able to learn new skills and apply them within an organized system. They weren't trained, they weren't developed in the cognitive ability necessary, mastering the cognitive growth and ability to learn, apply, and move on. They stuck in the system. And that's, I think, what you're talking about, the middle class change.
The invisible hand of the market is no substitute for policies that address the social disruption of your other policies, your other economic policies. We devastated the aspirations, pride, income, life expectancy, and the future of an entire American social class, and thought they would all work out because people would upgrade.
And this is not a political show. This is only about business, but it certainly impacts everything. So now we're seeing with the far right in the U.S. Manipulating this kind of thing, and to create the trouble for everybody else, and utilizing that fear mongering in local politics now.
But before we get political, let me switch it to China.
Yeah.
Because the disruption in China created a modern middle class, a bourgeoisie, so to speak, with self-governing capability and aspiration, and that ended in Tiananmen Square in 1989. In 1989. Right? Subsequent to that, the party line, so to speak, in China, they needed to articulate that. And as you say, you could articulate something as manipulation, or you could articulate it, constructively. They needed to articulate it, and they dug into the resentments about having been colonized and being a great power that people are holding down. Right? It's ironic that we would be a target of that, because if there's any country on earth that didn't do that, it's the United States. Right? So you have in both countries, because of the disruption, either manipulative or poorly articulated social pain and demands on the part of well-deserving publics, right, that deserve what they expected, what the culture told them to expect, right, who feel that they have been shafted by this. The sad thing is, right, the Chinese were shifting towards not exporting everything, but producing for their domestic market. This thing was working out, right? The interesting thing is that there's nowhere else to go. That's where you end up anyway. Now, we could take 30 years of being isolated in the Cold War blocks before we get there, or we could just stop this animosity, right, and get back to doing what's good, making money, prospering, having good infrastructure, or raising a nice generation well. I mean, we need to stop fighting. All right, the politics is, when we talk about politics, we're basically saying this has shifted to a fight, so let's go talk about a fight. Now, you don't have to. It never was supposed to. It fell off the rails, right? And there are so many reasons why we could put it back on the rails. We have to, one, stop the amygdala hijack, stop using the conflict, right? But two, go back to understanding who we are and what we did to create this opportunity, and how close we are to actually succeeding. Right? You could imagine a world very practically in 10 years where this joint US-Chinese world economy thing has been worked out to everybody's satisfaction. Right? We get back down to stopping that income stagnation we've suffered from 50 years here. Right? Better than fighting. I know everybody's mad, but stop it. Right? Look at your self-interest. What is it? Right? Now, can we have a conversation like this with China? Yeah, absolutely. Right? That's where we need to go. A globally agile conversation. You have to be able to global agility means you can walk into one of these circumstances where there is a conflict, right? Put the conflict in the box that it needs to be, put the lid on it for a while, build the other strengths, the other parts of the relationship. Work out what people's interests are. Figure out how to get there as a group that's divided by nature. It's not like we're just talking to our own people here. It's a whole other country, right? So it's a very complicated conversation, but the stakes are really wonderful. I mean, we either go in one direction where we spend the next 50 years divided in Cold War blocks, or we lead, right? Even our adversaries, what we consider our adversaries, towards something that's better. This is consistent with our policy since the 1700s. It's consistent with George Kennan and containment. It's consistent with Dwight Eisenhower and George C. Marshall. Everything that's good about American foreign policy, right, says that this is the way to handle it. And we should go back and do that. And if everybody in the public becomes a little bit more globally agile, right? It's a rising tide that lifts all boats. I mean, how do you propose good policy in a country where everybody's angry at the people you're talking about?
It doesn't penetrate.
Yeah. And it's like, hey, I don't get much from getting angry. I usually realize that afterwards I've wasted opportunities. I've spent a lot of treasure, right, and time, and it amounted to nothing. All right, cool heads. I mean, George Kennan, he said, we've got this communist thing going on here in Russia and in China. We just beat the Nazis. We can't afford to, just go, straight into World War III. We're going to have to contain this thing. But he didn't say it with anger. He said it dispassionately. He said, it's got to solve itself out. They got systems that, are hostile. We can't beat them, but we can outweight them. And in the meantime, why don't we have a good life too? And then the contrast of the West life, the Western economic life, the prosperity for so many people in the society, which there's a problem there. But that contrast with the equality and poverty that you saw in the Soviet Union and communist China, that's what turned the tables. Nobody wants to be poor.
Yeah.
So the job is to make people, give people the opportunity to prosper. And so we're good at that. This is the stuff we do well.
Well, we have to come to a close in the next 5 minutes or so, and get ready for the next edition. Next week would be great, where we could review what we've talked about the past 2 times, today and one prior, and looking at the world. And every so often there's a blow up, like, for instance, this being the 7th of February, and the balloon incident, the balloon caper, and I think it would have been better for Secretary of State Blinken to continue on his trip and then have this kind of a discussion that you're talking about with this nice smiley guy that seen over in China, who seemed to be welcoming rapprochement, and then all of a sudden this thing happens.
I'll go one better with you if you allow me. This is a bit scatological.
Scatological.
Yeah.
What's that mean?
Kind of dirty. Not for polite company. But I think the proper response, as that balloon flew over the entire continent of the United States, was a mass mooning, where everybody goes. I mean, let the guy in some office in the Ministry of Defense in Beijing look at that. We spy on you, you spy on us. You're not supposed to, get caught like that. You did. Here's our answer.
Or the middle finger. Right?
Yeah. Anger is seldom a globally agile or a smart or wise reaction. Anybody can push your buttons if you let them. And you can go out in the world and push people's buttons. I guarantee you, if you want to, there's probably 1,000 fights out there ongoing in the world that you could step right into, be on one side, and hate somebody and be hated by some other people. Just like that. Don't do that. Just don't. Sticks and stones or whatever it is. We know how to do this, how to act like adults. Just because it's a group of people doesn't mean it doesn't have to act like an adult. I'm talking about countries, corporations, whatever. Just because you got 100 people instead of one, it doesn't relieve us of the obligation of being, good people.
So in the next show, I'd like to bring in not only the continuation of this topic, but the impact on the powers that be, and the impact of the earthquake today in Middle East, and how it's impacting trade, how it's impacting humanity coming together to help Turkey and Syria deal with all this terrible disaster. And the world is responding. And that is, like, all of a sudden an earthquake, a shift of people coming to help.
But I've done a lot of humanitarian assistance, so I'd be quite pleased to talk about that. I would also like to talk about we mentioned last time, human capital management, not human resources, not managing a staff, but from the point of view of international organizations, corporate organizations, any CEO, even the HR staff. What's the value that everybody involved in your company, can add? You know as well as I do that most value is left on the table. And there are ways to use it. And I've, in the humanitarian work I did, I'd have to form a team of people from the country that was, having the war or the conflict from scratch until 9 months later they were capable of executing multi-million-dollar funded humanitarian assistance projects. And so I have a unique opportunity to actually form teams that became extraordinarily excellent. And it's my impression as a business coach in America for 10 years after that you'll find 1 out of 1,000 companies actually taps into human potential. Right? We've got our, everybody we look at is so, low on the standard of human potential compared to us, that we're all in this thing together. We think that the calibration only goes from 1 to 2, or you could rev it up to 3. You can rev up humans up to, 10 or 100. We're capable of far more than is asked of us, and that we're ever able to give, right? Global agility, in the sense that it asks you to go back and figure out who you are culturally, and take ownership of who you are going to be culturally, is one of those things that's actually say, okay, what is my human potential, right? How that matters in a globalized business environment is the point, right? Who in your company, speaks the foreign language of your supplier, and what position is that person holding? Question mark. And I'd leave you on that one, but it's like, we can get into this.
So Rob Pianka, thanks so much for doing this today. This is a series, a Mastermind series about understanding geopolitics and history and economics, all wrapped into one. So what's the title of your book?
American Refugees, a Strategy for the 21st Century. And, you got a fish in a tank. The fish jumps out of the tank, it's out of water. The fish is sitting in the tank, somebody knocks it, there's a hole in the tank, the water drains out, same thing, still out of water. Globalization has put us all on the bottom of our dry fish tanks, and we have to figure out how to breathe air, right? You have to adapt. Strength, the Darwin said the greatest strength is adaptation. The species that survives are the ones that adapt. Not the strongest, not the most intelligent, the ones that adapt, right? We're at a point where we need to adapt, and we're perfectly capable of it. Matter of fact, we're good at this.
Thank you very much for being on Global TV Talk Show again. Rob Pianka, globallyagile.com.
Always wonderful.
See you soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.